Brilliant. So we'll get started. First of all, thanks everybody so much for joining us today. My name is Ros Williams, and I am the Interim Director of the Digital Good Research Network, the ESRC Digital Good Network. And it is lovely to see you all joining us today. I first of all will give a quick visual description of myself. We do that at our events to ensure that they're accessible for people who are joining us who may not be able to see us for any reason. So as you may be able to see, I'm currently wearing a very fetching grey shirt. It's a check grey shirt. I'm wearing spectacles. My hair is particularly buoyant today. I've got brown hair. I've got mixed grey skin, and I think hopefully you could also see that I'm in a beautifully peach room joining you from home today. So yes, thank you all so much for joining us. I want to introduce very quickly the ESRC Digital Good Network. And the ESRC Digital Good Network is an initiative that's based out of the University of Sheffield, but across a number of different institutions across the UK and beyond, who are predominantly interested in building what we describe as a research community focused on what a good digital society ought to look like and how indeed it is we might actually get there. Our goal here is to bring disciplines and sectors together, and a large part of what we do is fund interdisciplinary research via a range of different schemes, including fellowships, internships, and importantly for today, the Digital Good Research Fund, which is an opportunity for scholars to apply for funding to undertake original empirical research that helps us to further our understanding of what a digital good society might look like and how we would get there. So the Digital Good Research Fund is a really integral part of what we do. And I'm going to introduce you to a few colleagues who've applied successfully for the Research Fund shortly. But if we can skip to the next slide very quickly, I just wanted to give you all a sense of the broader sort of interest that we have as a network and how that is essentially draped over three really key societal challenges. The first of these is equity. So how do we ensure that digital technologies contribute towards a society to make it a more equitable society for people? Resilience as well is a theme that is really central to the work that we do, how we might think about digital technologies as a means of enhancing well-being in the broad range of things that confront us today, from pandemics all the way through to misinformation. And integral to all of this is the idea of sustainability. How do we make the digital future more sustainable, but equally to think critically about this idea, right? So what are we trying to sustain? So the Digital Good Research Fund, which is, as I say, one of our key means of redistributing the £4 million that we've received from the ESRC, or part of that money, towards people doing research, is a scheme that we run each year. And we were really fortunate to fund a range of different projects in the first round, the 2023 round of the Digital Good Research Fund. We've got three members of that cohort joining us today to talk about participatory research. The first of these is Dr. Dylan Yamada-Rice, who's an Associate Professor of Immersive Storytelling at Plymouth University. And Dylan is the PI of Exploring Children's Attitudes Towards Notions of the Digital Good Through Hybrid Arts Practice. We've also got Rosendy Fernandez Galabo, who is a research associate at Lancaster University, who's the PI of Cooperativa Digital, that you'll hear more about today. And also Dr. Sanjay Sharma, who's an associate professor at the University of Warwick, who is the PI of Reimagining AI with Afrofuturist Speculative Design. So what we're going to do now is jump into three fantastic presentations from these three scholars, starting with Dylan, who'll then hand over the mantle to Rosendy, who'll then pass it over to Sanjay. So Dylan, first of all, I'll pass over to you to begin the presentations for today. Thank you.
Thanks, Ros. Hello, everyone. Thanks for having me. It's really nice to be here. So as Ros said, my name is Dylan. I'm currently based at the University of Plymouth. My interest is in immersive storytelling and digital play, all looking and working with children. So I'm here today just to talk a little bit about how I include children within research. And the first image you can see here was really how can we make research accessible to children even from the very start? So how do we invite children into research? So here was me redesigning an information sheet for the children that I'll be working with, who are aged 8 to 13, and thinking how perhaps having a signature and signing things and having written information might not be as inclusive as finding ways in which children might more commonly receive information. Of course, we have to still go through their parents and give them the information sheets and the consent forms and so on. And of course, I look for informed consent from children and signs of disconsent and so on. But in terms of that first step of explaining the project, I would tend to create comics nowadays in order to share the invitation to join the research. Next slide, please, Nikki. At the very beginning of the project, we had 2 network public-facing events, which were a series of talks from within the project and also invited guests and the public, where we tried to kind of define what might be the key aspects for children to explore in relation to this notion of creating a digital good society, but conversely, what might they perceive as digitally bad? Also, because I am situated not within social sciences, but within arts and design backgrounds, looking at those extremes of good and bad is also a kind of design mechanism where you look at the extreme ends of the scale in order to kind of get something in the middle. And these themes, as you can see on the right here, arose really as key points that people who joined the workshops and the speakers felt should be looked at in relation to the work that we were going to do within children, with children within schools and in community centres to look at kind of home educated students and so on. Next slide, please, Nikki. From that, I took those themes, and I'm just going to show you a couple now. There are actually 29, where I designed visual prompts. So these topics, as you know, around AI and other aspects of digital technology could be considered quite sensitive, could be considered quite complicated. Many of them are quite political. How can we really bring that back down to a child audience? And you've probably heard of Tim Ingold, but this notion of thinking through making, and in my case, thinking through drawing specifically, of really kind of reworking the drawings and trying to think about what are the key questions we want to ask children. So, for example, one of the speakers we had was Octavia Reeves from the Ada Lovelace Institute, and she said, you know, there's a lot of work going on that looks generally at AI, but what we need to do is kind of look specifically at AI and its uses. So rather than just getting people's ideas about, you know, do you agree with AI or not? What about if you were to think about it for specific scenarios? So, for example, in healthcare, or, you know, would you rather have a teacher, an actual teacher, or an AI bot marking your exams and so on, and why? Next slide, please, Nikki. And of course, then mapping that back to what's happening in the literature right now, in the academic literature, what's also in the news, and bringing it back to really specific examples. So given that these robot vacuum cleaners are capable of sharing pictures of you using the bathroom on the internet, would you rather just clean your room, or is it just a good payoff, and actually it's worth a risk worth taking? You can probably tell from my tone that I still sweep my own floors, but again, just trying to work out what kids, from their perspectives, what they think would be a good trade-off for this data. So in past projects, we've worked with them and they've said things like, actually, you know, Google Maps, like crowdsources data, is great because it lets us know when traffic jams are coming up for family holidays and so on. But other forms they were less keen about. So how about in relation to AI? So next slide, please, Nikki. This one was in relation to the climate crisis and the idea that AI, despite its names of natural things, big scale data farms, kind of underpaid labor in terms of labeling large data sets and so on. Again, just trying to get kids on a very basic level to think about, what does intelligence mean? Is be building systems based on slime mold or fungi or something completely different? So quite complex questions that are even difficult for us to get our heads around as adults who've been reading in this field for a while now. But what do children in primary school and the beginning part of secondary school think? Next slide, please. And then we said about, okay, so from these visual prompts, how do we make workshops that include art-based activities? So this idea that play is really a fundamental form of communication for children, perhaps more so than speaking, writing, reading, especially for the youngest children. How can we make these playful? How can we bring in that thinking through making? So we had a group workshop with just the key team members, and we each designed a prompt. Then we pass them over to Richard Nash, and you'll see on the next slide, please, Nikki. That we've really begun to think about how might these look for children in the classroom. So with this one, we're going to ask children to design their digital self. What does the digital you look like out of Play-Doh? And then we're going to teach them how to scan it in 3D using photogrammetry. So bringing together those analogs and digital forms of making. So using the materials that we're questioning them about within the methodologies as well. Next slide, please. And this is, I think, the last one that, so I can see in the chat here that it's glitching a bit for you. I'm so sorry about that. I'm actually on campus and can't get any better to the Wi-Fi than I am, but yeah, I'm sorry for that. And this last one here that I'm going to share with you, which was the idea of, can you use Lego to build a smartphone that's better than the one you've got? And then we'll begin to look at their designs, but also their conversations around their making for their ideas. You know, do they still want a screen? What could it be if it didn't look like today's smartphone? And that's all for me. And I'm going to hand over to the next speaker. Thank you very much.
Hi, everyone. This is Rosendy speaking. It was just a coincidence that Dylan and I structured our slides in the same way, but it was not something that we agreed on. So I'll present the ethics, design, and co-production, the Cooperativa Digital project. So this is kind of the sections as well. So in essence, Cooperativa Digital explored the transformation of ReApp, a privately owned Brazilian donation app, into a community-managed app, a commons, like, for example, Wikipedia. Wikipedia is not private, it's not public, it's managed by their own community. So the ReApp mobile app is a simple platform that connects donors to NGOs/charities and their causes. It takes advantage of a unique tax incentive that allows citizens to donate a portion of their VAT from their receipts to any NGO charity. So you could take a picture and then donate the receipt by following a few steps on the app. So here in this project, we had the opportunity to work with this promising platform that can give more visibility to third sector organizations and their causes. The platform and its members, around over 18 NGOs, were our non-academic partners, and we had University Federal of Maranhão, represented by Telemedia, and their computer researchers, science researchers. So this project, just to locate, took place in São Luís, Maranhão. It's the state with the lowest human development index in Brazil, located in the northeast region. On top of that, there's no such culture of donation like in the UK, which means the third sector itself is an under-resourced sector. So we formed this partnership because each of us had something to offer and wanted something back. In this true collaboration, everyone benefited from this project. ReApp and communities wanted a more functional platform that could give them more autonomy and, of course, offer their participation. Telemedia UFMA, the university in Brazil, wanted a real-life scenario so their students could learn how to code through practice and, of course, offering their coding skills. And Imagination also, together with Digital Good Network. So the Digital Good Network are interested in understanding how equity in platforms look like, and we wanted to develop and test a new design practice method that could equip the community partner and inform at the same time how equity is practiced in platforms. Next, please. Ethics international participation had some challenges, starting from the collaboration agreement. So UK universities are retaining the rights from what researchers develop and interested in patents, but also they want to make things as open as possible. So I had to kind of fight a bit with the legal team to put an open source clause on what we developed in the project. After all, a lot of the efforts on this project came from the community partner, and at the end of the day, they would have to ask permission from the universities from something they co-developed and have co-ownership. And then from the ethics, I thought I had to submit an ethics application to an ethics committee in Brazil, but actually I had to submit an ethics application to Lancaster University. So this process was a bit weird because during the ethics application, the reviewer said, you have to put the phone number of your head of the department in the UK. So I was like, I don't think anyone in Brazil will call an international call just to talk with the head of the department. Anyway, and also by using consent form and participant information sheet from the UK, we were setting the participation and how it should happen instead of doing together with the community. And also, like, our academic partners and non-academic partners had different ethics. So in our initial visits with the NGO directors told us they could record their conversation if they wanted, but our research assistant said she was already recording because she told me at the moment that the community welcome you in this space, the researchers are already welcoming you to document almost whatever they want according to their research ethics. And their non-academic partner was also recording everything and posting on Instagram. Well, I cannot control what they do, especially when it was more natural to them for them to record everything. So I remember when I was the DigiJane showcase, Dan Richard was surprised to see a picture with everyone, with the whole group. And well, I just said, privacy concerns are a bit different from the ones in Brazil. So his private concerns, I mean. So in summary, ethics in international participation is not very straightforward. Next, please. So from here, I will distinguish design from what we researchers created and from co-production, which was what the participants created together during workshops. So using an action research methodology, or what we called in our field research through design, our plan for this project involved redesigning the algorithm that matches donors with NGOs to ensure fairness and alignment with the community needs, as well as testing a new design practice/method. As said before, we were interested in developing this practice to create a commons platform. There are plenty of frameworks to analyze existing commons, but few frameworks to create from the scratch, kind of. So our design framework we wanted to test through the project was based on Elinor Ostrom framework composed of 7 rules types, which is how members manage a commons. But we didn't show this diagram to participants. We broke it down into accessible tasks so they could create their own commons platform. Next, please. So to address community needs of raising funds through their stories, which is kind of selling their dream, diversifying their fundraising resources, because the only way they could get funding, donation, was through these receipts. They wanted something more. And also having autonomy instead of, like, you know, usual Airbnb and Uber where you have the middleman taking part of it. They wanted to have like more autonomy in terms of how to get funding. So we developed a series of 3 design workshops. Next, please. Where we, together with the group, we redesigned the algorithm designs, designed the control mechanisms to prevent platform disruption, or let's say destruction even, and designed the rules for changing the algorithms again. This involved the research team to design a plan, a tool, a set of tools to support this co-creation, and also build prototypes to enable the NGOs to visualize their ideas. So to create this co-creation process, you have to imagine like you are the designer and think about the structure you have to create to enable others to do what you would do as designer, but in a more accessible and simple way. Next, please. So we used workshop as a design research method where participants identified issues, proposed changes to the algorithm, and then observed and reflect on the proposed changes to the platform. Next, please. Here are the tools that we produced on the workshop one. So the first tool on the left, it's kind of a step-by-step process to donate a receipt to an NGO. The second is to a detailed screenshot of the existing app so they could propose changes, and like more specifically on the A3 pro forma sheet, like with a small smartphone. Next, please. So these are the responses that we translated into wireframes. Initially, the React app had no filters. So participants created the following algorithms. So this one is categories. So imagine that there was no order on how the institutions was showing up on the existing app, meaning that usually the first one was likely to get the more donation. So it was kind of an unfair process. So they created this category so people could match properly with the causes they support. Next, please. But also they changed the way the search bar was working and also proposed an A to Z listing. But these are some of the things that we did. Next, please. For the second workshop, here are the tools that we created for them to visualize inappropriate behavior, like inappropriate and good behavior. So they could create mechanisms to avoid platform disruption, like someone exploiting and taking advantage of like the system. So in this way, when they created the mechanism, they could create a more like fair system where the system would enforce some rules. Next, please. So, and then is when they changed the algorithm totally and said, you know what, it's better to create kind of a Netflix style because this is what we are more used to. And then we could always get some fresh ideas from it. So instead of like using the A to Z, which is, you know, people will start to exploit it by, you know, using 00 name on the institution or project. Next, please. And then they also created some rewards and punishment mechanisms, such as a credit system and also punish system in case someone, in case of recurrent bad behavior in the platform. Next. And for the workshop 3, we created these tools we designed these tools to enable them to think about changing the algorithm again in the future, which would involve thinking about the structure, the organogram, and the roles each member would have within the platform. Next, please. So here are some responses on how they changed their ideas and ended up creating a kind of traditional voting system to elect the president members and the roles within the platform. Next. So for our future research, we would like to share our method practice for peer critique review with like to validate our framework. Our project report has over 60 pages documenting the whole process, but we're planning to find creative ways to share it with the researchers and practitioners and make it available later on. Our idea is to create a wiki, so we can edit and provide some comments. Next. Thank you very much. And now I'm gonna hand over to Sanjay, please.
Hi, I'm here, but I'm not sure if you can see me for some reason.
Yes, we can see you.
We can see you.
Oh, you can see. Okay, great. Okay, I'll make a start. First of all, thanks for the invitation. It's great to be here with so many participants. So I'm going to follow on from a couple of really great talks. I'm afraid my slides are far more basic than the other presenters, but I do hope to raise some relevant issues, particularly around ethics. I'll try to keep it short as well because I'm kind of like the last person. Okay, so just to remind you, I'm the principal investigator of the Digital Good funded project, Reimagining AI with Afrofuturist speculative design. Now, a core element of this project involves working closely and collaborating with the NGO third sector group, Blastfest. Now, Blastfest are a Birmingham-based community organisation who explore science and technology through creative and cultural practices. And the aim of the project is to explore the possibilities of reimagining AI by centering the experiences of minoritized groups. Often they're the most negatively impacted by these new technologies, and to do this through using participatory methods. Next slide, please. Now, I'm sure you're aware that terms such as participation, collaboration, co-production have become buzzwords for doing research beyond universities. And you can also add in co-design, engagement, and impact. It's difficult to get away from those sorts of terms now. So what I want to do in this brief time is just to critically reflect on the participatory methods, particularly in the way the principles of the project I was developing with Blastfest. So essentially me located as the academic institutional researcher and Blastfest as the community partner, and try to kind of unpack that a little bit more, that relationship. Next slide, thanks. Okay, so to begin, I want to briefly invoke the article written by the feminist scholar, Daphne Patai. I'm not sure how many of you are familiar with this. It's quite a long time ago. The scholar wrote this, and the title sounds a little bit dated, but it does highlight an inherent imbalance of power between often the researcher and the researched. And Patai's response to the question of, is ethical research possible, is a kind of no, essentially. And when I read this article very long time ago, it's haunted me ever since. And in certain moments in my research career, it stopped me doing certain kinds of research because I didn't think it was possible for it to be anywhere near ethical. So as a kind of provocation, what I'm trying to suggest is that participatory methods are fraught with tensions, and I'm kind of sure you know this, but I want to make them pretty much more explicit. They're fraught with tensions, particularly concerning the power relations between researchers based at universities and our community partners. Next slide, please. So these are some sort of troubling questions I constantly ask myself, and I'm sure some of you have been asking yourself similar things, like, what does the invitation to participate mean? What are the conditions of participation? How are research agendas determined at what point? Who is the research actually for, and who benefits? University researchers don't just do research for the social good. We do it for our careers, and we're often compelled to. And who owns the research? I think this came up in Rosendy's presentation in an interesting way. And I'd like to also ask, who's able to theorize? Is it only the case that academics are the experts here? More broadly, how is agency distributed in the project? And can the institutional power of the researcher be undone? And I'm particularly interested in that question. Now, these questions aren't easily resolved. And having said that, though, these tensions of participatory research, they can be productive. It can push research to be more inclusive and democratic, though while at the same time making us aware that participatory approaches can legitimate new ways of exploiting community partners. So if I was to put this more cynically, I guess this is spurred on by a kind of neoliberal research sector, which essentially wants to maximize returns. So with this in mind, I'll briefly describe how I worked with Blastfest. Now, first came into contact with the organization. We were both co-eyes in a large NHS grant about public health and the impact of AI. And unfortunately, we got to the second round, but the grant wasn't successful. At that point, because I was a co-eye, I wasn't working like directly with Blastfest, and it was mediated through the PI. Having said that, after the unsuccessful bid, I did keep in contact with them. I'm based in Coventry, Blastfest based in Birmingham, so there's a physical proximity helped as well. And I managed to raise a small amount of internal funding from my university to facilitate a public engagement activity with Blastfest, exploring the impact of AI. And it was through working even on this quite small grant, I developed a working relationship, particularly with the director of Blastfest, Anita Shervington, who's got a lot of experience working with universities. And one of the things that constantly came up was discussing the politics of researching marginalized communities, working with them, co-producing knowledge, all the buzzwords we use. And that became a kind of key kind of point of operations with them, in the sense that can we do ethical research? Is it possible? So we kept asking this question, and at the same time, the Digital Good Network grant came up, and I approached again Anita from Blastfest and said, "Would you like to be a collaborator?" We agreed, and we were successful. But during the whole research process with Blastfest, I tried to stick with a number of principles. I'm not going to go into the details of what we did because I haven't got time, but I just want to just broadly reflect on some principles. I'm just going to highlight 3 today. And where there's many others, this isn't exhaustive, but I don't have time to raise them here, but could do in the discussion. So firstly, the idea of community partner as a co-developer. Now, we hear this all the time. It's easy to claim an external partner as a co-developer. But in practice, it can be actually quite challenging. For example, even when completing a research form, who has the knowledge and expertise to do something like that, to complete a research proposal? Or on the other end of it, when we're co-writing or co-producing an academic article, it's not straightforward to undo those kind of inherent hierarchies in those sorts of research activities. Secondly, resourcing the community partner. Now, as an ethical principle, I don't apply for grants that don't financially support community partners. I think too often the time and labor are either rendered invisible or just merely seen as voluntary. In fact, I've taken it on to be my mission to shift institutional resources towards community partners. So in some ways, maybe in a small way, it's trying to reverse sort of institutional forms of extractivism. And that takes me to a third principle, the idea of minimizing extractivist institutional research or practices. So echoing Patai, I'd argue universities researchers are kind of driven by a certain kinds of form of extractivism when it comes to working with community partners. I'm sure many of you people might contest that. So I see my role as trying to minimize and subvert this relationship. I don't think you can completely undo it, but it's a strategy one should be informed by. I think often, notwithstanding the research we've seen so far, with academics being constantly pushed towards doing external research, there's a lot of research now sort of based on this kind of flyby or parachuting practices with community partners. It's kind of like take their data and run, you know, thanks for it, but I'll never work with you again. Rather, we should be crafting long-term sustainable relationships based on mutual exchange and trust, and which is what I've tried to do with Blastfest. It's been iterated over almost 3 years now. And recently I've been successful in a fellowship, and I'm again working with Blastfest. Okay, final slide. Just to say a little bit about the kind of more the principle of the kind of method of working, which are co-developed, is the idea of a dialogic methodology, and this is based on the notion of call and response. This is actually inspired by musical practices from the Global South, as well as theorists such as Bakhtin. So what it tries to do is to be creative and iterative method of continual dialogue, continual exchange, which opens up and questions and tries to democratize the research process. And it makes the researcher more vulnerable in a sense. And I think that's really important. So if I was going to try to conclude, I don't think the emphasis should simply be on let's develop more participatory methods. I think the emphasis should be on how do we forge ethical relationships? And from that, how do participatory methods develop? Okay, that's it for me. Thank you for listening.
Thanks so much, Sanjay. So we've actually got some time now for questions. I think there was a slide there that invited you all to join the mailing list for the Digital Good Network, and we'll get that slide back up at the end and get the information shared with everybody so they can figure out how to do that if you're not already a member. We've got a range of different questions that have already actually come in through the Q&A, and I would encourage folks to keep adding to that. A number of different questions specifically for you, and some I think that overarch across the presentation. But just to give Sanjay and then Rosendy a bit of a break, let's hop back to Dylan, because there were a couple of clarification questions for you, Dylan. I think it was from Goda and from Sasha. They asked what approaches to sampling you undertook, particularly around socioeconomic backgrounds, but also a question about the examples that you use in your comics, and particularly about the Roomba and whether that was one of those and how that worked. So over to you, Dylan.
Yeah, thank you for those questions. Originally, we wanted to work specifically with children from Bradford, from the Brawn in Bradford cohort. And that is a very diverse group of children. Probably you're familiar with it, but if not, you could look up, Google Born in Bradford. Unfortunately, I think they're just inundated with research requests at the moment, and that hasn't happened. So we've shifted to working with local schools in Plymouth. And we've pretty much had to go with which schools were up for having us in. So in terms of diversity, I can't actually answer yet, having not been into the schools. So we start this week with the data collection. But we were also very keen not to own here in Plymouth. Have I dipped out?
You had just for a moment, but you're back again.
Thank you. So yeah, so we've also gone with community groups here in Plymouth as well. So there's a community group called Nudge, which you can look up, and we're going to be working with the home education students there, but also children just from the local community. And that is kind of community work in practice. So we think we'll get quite a diverse group there as well. In terms of the Roomba example, we won't share that with kids right away. It's more usually the way I work is to keep things as open as possible so that we can get children's takes on things, because normally they're quite different from the starting point of adults, and what they have to say is often quite surprising. And then what we tend to do is return and go back with more information based on what they shared with us. So at some point, I think it's very likely that we will share that example, but not right off the bat, as it were.
Thanks, Dylan. Over to you then, Rosendy, because there are a number of questions here about your work as well, particularly I think some of the more power-related aspects of your work. I'd love to hear what you thought about the question about how and whether you engage those who couldn't access what one of the attendees described as the online world, and how you engage those guys. But also Carlos wanted some more details specifically on the experience of writing your ethics application at Lancaster, what the challenges were, whether you came up against any specific challenges in doing that.
Well, I'm looking at a Q&A here, so I'll try to reply all of them together. So like the first one is, how do you manage the power and control in your design workshop? So the interesting part is all the participants, they were all like under-resourced organizations, and they were all working on delivering social projects, social interventions. So and none of them knew about each other. They knew like a bit about what each organization was doing, but they never met in person before. So there is this, let's say, engaging and fun approach where I was not there like as an authoritarian person saying what they had to do. So I created this structure where it was open enough for them to work around a specific boundary, which is like to deal with the algorithm. But I mean, there was, a slightly like kind of power because one of the NGOs was an NGOs for entrepreneurs, meaning that they had the person had stronger background in more capitalistic approach, but still there was a discussion, but it was like not like a aggressive one. Everything was very chill, you know. So and when you work in small groups, you cannot follow what's going on in every group. What you have is just the material they produce as part of the workshop. So when they present and they have some arguments, but it's not something that like it was hard to deal with, I would say. I'm not sure if I replied to this question. How did you manage the relation and expectation with the British partners to be prepared for the more informal, less stringent practices in Brazil, Latin America? So I'm Brazilian, actually. So I would say the British partner would be me and the DGN, the Digital Good Network. So far, the more strict practice is for me to deliver a report. I'm promising to you I'll deliver in time. So there are 60 pages, and now that I'm dealing with that, I'll respond to your report, which is, I would say, more straightforward. But I would say by having this local knowledge of how things work. So for instance, in Latin America, Brazil, we have a bit more improvised approach. So for those who knows like what is the jeitinho brasileiro is like the way of living in Brazil. Everything seems to be like a priority. There's no list of priority. Everything happened at the same time, and you are very fast in a super fast-paced environment where things happen, and then you have to deal like it's basically like there's fire everywhere, and then you have to extinguish the fire all the time, like at the same time. And I would say being comfortable with this environment will be helpful, but it's harsh for someone that is used to have like a very strict where the bus is coming in like in 1 minute delay max or 3 minutes delay. But when you have no buses coming and basically participants showing up 1 hour and 20 minutes later than expected. So to me, it was like, oh, well, I'm used to this delays. But it means that you can always go overrun a bit on the events, because everyone understand that. I mean, you have to understand the culture. It's just hard to teach this kind of approaches, I would say. Interested in the ethics application, the operations clause. I can share with you the paper. So just drop me an email. There is a paper of someone in Canada that was writing exactly the clauses. And basically, whenever I was asking the legal team, can you add this? And then the person was saying, can you tell me exactly what words you want to add in the clause? I was like, I'm not from the legal side of contracts and stuff. But you know what? I got a template, wrote myself, and then tell me if this is good enough. So the manager, the legal team and the manager looked at it. Oh yeah, this is good enough. Well, it passed. Meaning that the idea here was to create an open source app, and it's kind of creating a mastodon. Anyone can just get later on, download the app and build their own micro platform of donation. So it doesn't need to be just one person. So that's at least was my goal. So yeah, I'll share with you this paper later.
Thanks, Rosendy. I'll jump over to Sanjay just to make sure that we've got some swapping of the mic going on. But I can see lots of questions still coming in as well, so we might have to jump back to you shortly. But Sanjay, there was a couple of questions here for you on your work. One is, I think, a really big question, which is, what do you actually mean when you say undoing institutional power? So I'll just, I think that's a big one to ask you. So I'll let you think about that. There might be potentially a more straightforward one for you here, which is what practical steps do you actually take to rebalance power as well? So maybe you have some examples about how you actually undertake that in practice that could counter the more abstract question there as well.
I suppose that my position is research tends to be initiated from centers of power, whether it's research councils setting broader programs, agendas, or universities, particularly in the age of the research excellence framework, that we have to have research which is outward facing, which engages, which has impact. So that's the sort of environment we're in, and I think that can fuel extractivism and exploitation from researchers, because we're kind of like, we have to go and do that. So to try to rebalance that, is one level is like, it's very basic, but make sure the community partner gets paid. And what I mean by that is not just a certain fee, but think about, and this is the discussions I've had with Blastfest, think about their whole infrastructures. And often they don't have infrastructures, they don't have offices, they don't have sick pay. So when you build in that costing, make sure it actually acknowledges a daily cost for them, as opposed to say how I'm paid in terms of salary. So I think the economic aspect is critical. And then the second aspect is, how is the research agenda developed? It's very rare to work with a community partner unless you developed a long-term relationship. A community partner approaches a researcher and says, this is what we want. And more kind of original forms of action research tend to work or attempt to work from that. But my basic argument is that we cannot undo the institution that we work from unless I leave the university. But it's a bit like, I think Gayatri Spivak talks about this in a slightly different way. What do we do with our privilege? How can we shift it to somewhere else, and try to empower, to use that word, the groups we work with? And I don't have a single blueprint practice for that, because I think it has to be forged in the relationship, in the specific context of the group you're working in. So I'm not into kind of thinking about some sort of universal practices. I think you've got to sort of be on the ground, it's got to be situated, and many feminist researchers talk about that. I think that's one way forward.
Thanks, Sanjay.
I'm sure the others have lots to say about this as well.
I've no doubt, but I definitely think that point around paying participants appropriately is key. One of the things that we've come to learn through the Digital Good Research Fund and some of the reviewing that gets done there is that we try to ensure that the costing is appropriate to the different kinds of labour, not just, or very often not even in the main researcher labour, but the other kinds of labour that get drawn into research as well. And ensuring that that is properly reflected in costing too. And I think that's a bigger structural question, but that particularly UCRI and other big research funders in the UK and beyond are really only grappling with now in a really meaningful way, but there's still a long way to go.
So if I can just add something quickly. So during the developing the research proposal with a community partner, they're not getting paid. It's their time. I'm getting paid because I'm still employed by the university. So it's those sorts of things which are difficult to deal with.
Absolutely, yeah. I've got a question here that I think is probably for everybody, but I'm going to put it back to Dylan, because something that I think is really interesting when I hear about colleagues like yourselves who are doing participatory research is that very often there's quite a celebratory tone about it, that it's managed to overcome things. But Amin asks, do you think that true collaboration with community members as equal partners is possible? So Dylan, do you think you achieved that in your research with children? Oh, you're muted, Dylan.
Thank you. I definitely strive for it. And I think that's why play is in there as the sort of key part of the methodology always, because I think it's quite leveling. And even the work that I've done with adults in terms of parents and stuff, play is often quite a leveling way of conducting research. But also, I know we've had a lot of talk about chaos in different cultural contexts, but kids are quite chaotic by their nature, and schools are often very, very structured by their nature too. So going in and allowing chaos, I think, is also part of that way of meeting children and saying, okay, in this approach, it's okay to be chaotic, it's okay to pick things up, to answer them in a completely different way. And I've definitely got more confident over the sort of long period of time of which I've been researching and being able to embrace that chaos. But yeah, I think also that kind of flexibility to let people take things off in a very different direction, that's definitely there as well. So yeah, I think it's possible. Absolutely, yeah.
Fantastic. And can I just ask as well, Dylan, because just whilst I've got you, this question around play and particularly the using that as a kind of a modality to communicate with kids. Presumably, that are the lessons to be learned from those of us who are doing research with adults as well, the utilising play in that way.
Yeah, I mean, again, I've always felt it to be quite levelling. So in workshops that I've done for adults where they've been sort of designing things for kids. So for example, designing digital play for children who are in hospital. Play can also be quite levelling, and if you've got kind of experts in child health and you've got academics and you've got parents and you've got other people who are all experts and have a stake in this thing, once you bring sort of playful methods to the table, it does sort of dissipate those power imbalances where you're kind of going, can you draw something, or can you make something out of Play-Doh? And usually that bit of people going, oh God, I haven't touched Play-Doh for a million years. And, but that in itself of having something to touch and talk about at the same time, I think that can really reduce sort of power differences across research groups. And I've always found that with adults as well, although the majority of my work is with children. But with children, again, if you go in a playful way, you're never quite as expert at play as they are. So you're actually always on the back foot because they're trying to make things more fun than what you've actually prepared for them. They're like, well, this is okay, but what have you thought about this? So actually you become sort of on the back foot to their knowledge, which is kind of the position you want to be in as a researcher, isn't it? Of knowing
yeah.
that.
It's absolutely, I think for many researchers, probably including myself, honestly, quite an uncomfortable disposition to embrace the chaos, as you say.
Luckily I am quite chaotic, so it doesn't bother me too much.
Thank you. Rosendy, we've got a question here that might actually be particularly pertinent to yourself, although others might want to come in on it as well. It's from Rebecca Dracey-Collinshaw, and it's about ownership and IP in relation to UK universities. Did you come across issues of ownership, particularly in relation to Cooperativa as a project and design? Could you tell us a little bit about the challenges confronting you there and how you overcome them, if possible?
You mean like the challenges of co-ownership? I mean, the project was to create this kind of true collaboration, meaning that at the point that we had participants co-developing it and with the clause of open source. So it's kind of, you have the name of the universities, but anyone in the world can in the future download the code and edit. It's just kind of like, I think a bit of like Mastodon, or it will be a public code, open source. You copy and then you can edit. It's just like basically what Linux was for Mac. It's the clause we used was for commercial uses, unfortunately, but I mean, we wanted only to keep it in the for non-commercial uses, but at the same time, we wanted it to open for development in the future. But I mean, again, as I said, if the legal team accepted that it was going to be open source, they won't make money out of it because there's no patent on what it's developed. It's to the world now. It's like it's a communal thing, so everyone owns it, and but at the same time, people can keep their own, let's say, version from them, like Mac did. You have an iOS and it's based on Unix, so you can always like commodify it if you want.
If you wish, indeed. Thanks, Rosandy. That's really helpful. I think, you know, sometimes the sort of the natural state of things in universities is how to manage IP and ownership and that kind of thing. And so I think it sounds like a lesson from yourself, Rosendy, is, you know, one does have to work, but can find workarounds to that not natural state of being, to try and make standard different kinds of ways of working. So that's really helpful, I think. Could I jump over to you, Sanjay, because there is a question here, and I'm minded, thank you very much, colleagues at the Digital Good Network, Ruth and Nikki, that we've only 5 minutes left. A question from Matt Dowse, which I think probably leans into your experience, Sanjay, of working not only with Blastfest, but with other community organisations as well. Matt is interested in working with organisations and groups that in developing early stages, their early stage journeys, and how you grapple with that, particularly what experiences you have in working with and attempting to resource those potential partners at those early stages. Bearing in mind, Sanjay, what you said, that that they've got a lot more skin in the game than yourself as somebody who's a salaried member of staff of the university. So how do you actually go about doing that in an equitable way?
Yeah, good question. I suppose, I mean, on a pragmatic level, you know, you look out for grants which are kind of easy to get, which are, you know, even to the point of the form is quite small. I use that as a measure. So often internal funds in universities are usually simpler to get than, say, external. And because it's a small fund, even if you don't get it, even if your community partner has given some of their time, it won't be a huge amount of time. But in that process, you get to know the community partner. And I think one of the practices is to kind of getting to know who you're working with, and kind of connecting and developing that sort of trustful relationship. So when another opportunity does arise, say another small grant, you're kind of more prepared because you're tuned in to working with them. So as a kind of simple suggestion is start off small, not too ambitious, try to get the money and then build on it. And I guess I've sort of done that with Blastfest. This is the 3rd iteration now I'm currently in with them. You don't always get that opportunity with one group. You know, sometimes groups dissipate, etc. But yeah, start off small. Always think about what commitment does it involve from the community partner. I think that as a kind of practice or principle, and obviously do as much as the work you can without determining the agendas as well, which isn't a simple thing to do.
Absolutely. Thanks, Sanjay. I think that's a really nice note to draw things together on. I'm not sure, Rosendy or Dylan, if you've got anything else you wanted to add to that prompt or any of the others before we finish off, but you're very welcome. We've got another minute or two left.
I was just typing an answer to the question about fostering co-ownership. And I think that thing about being very clear at the start about how much of people's contribution you're actually going to be able to realize has always been sort of key to. So I often co-develop games, video games with children, and children have this thing that you'll be able to, you know, take on their entire story, all their characters, make them famous. It will be on YouTube. They'll make money from the game, and actually being quite clear that you're going to listen to lots of ideas and probably find just a couple of points from the start. And it doesn't usually result in people not wanting to be involved, but it does sort of manage those expectations of, you know, you're not going to make them famous and those kind of things from the start.
Thanks, Dylan.
I'll stop typing that answer now.
Yeah, just the ownership part. Most of the situation participants are not the same, but in my case, the participants were always the same, and like 1 or 2 extra ones. It's basically because they had a benefit, like a real benefit from the project. I was not paying for them to come and join. Can you participate to analyze the digital good? No, they were analyzing and doing stuff because they saw they would get a benefit from it after the project, which is like a revised app that could really give them back this benefit in terms of donation. Imagine that you could only get receipts and now you can get real money.
Absolutely. Thanks, Rosendy. These are really happy notes to end on, I think. The idea of being honest about what's achievable through research. But also it's a great way to celebrate you guys and your fantastic research projects, which the Digital Good Network has been really proud to support and to see them coming in into reality. Thank you ever so much to everybody who's joined us today. You'll see we've just run over by a minute. I do apologise, but there is an invitation for you to leave some feedback on today's seminar. If you do have any feedback, we would love to hear it. Indeed, putting this on, as I was reminded by my colleague Nikki, is actually partly in response to feedback that we received at our January showcase, the Digital Good Network's last large in-person event. So thank you so much to Dylan, to Sanjay and Rosendy for your fantastic contributions today. Thank you to you all for joining us. This will be recorded and put on the Digital Good Network website. If you join us via our newsletter, you will be able to access that video and many other materials that we've put together in the time we've existed, and we're existing for a few more years yet, so there's plenty more to come. So thank you all so much. Have a fantastic week, and we'll see you soon. Goodbye.
Bye. Thanks for having me.